Welcome to the Alignment Show, where we explore what it really means to live in line with what matters most. If you're feeling the pull to make a shift or just need a little encouragement to stay on track, you're in the right place. In this solo episode, I'll share some thoughts that I hope will inspire and support you on your journey. Let's get into it. And why in the world did that thing say solo episode? I've got it's supposed to be the right one lined up. Oh, well, folks, we had some technical issues last Friday, and looks like we've got some maybe today. If you happened to join us live last Friday, we started an episode at the announced time, got about, I don't know, maybe 20 minutes into it, and then lost my internet connection. First time in 90 episodes that I've had that happen during the broadcast. And I wanted you to have the whole program. So we are rebroadcasting, and there's an advantage that I'll tell you about in just a second. But for those of you who are finding us for the first time, welcome to the Alignment Show. I usually start out by saying good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. And that means more today because we do have a guest from another part of the world than where I'm from. We have a worldwide audience, so this is not new stuff to a lot of you. But for an old boy raised in Tennessee, this is quite the experience being able to talk all around the world. So let me tell you a little bit about what's going on here at the Alignment Show today. First of all, let me tell you a little bit about our sponsors. As usual, we have SalesWise dot live. I'm so used to saying dot. SalesWise Live, which is an ongoing sponsor for us. They work with people to effectively, how do I put it? To learn to sell effectively, not in a pushy manner. I think that's what most of us think of when we think of sales. We think of manipulation and that sort of thing. Well, that's not what they do at SalesWise Live. Bob Berg, Jeff West, Kim Angeli, they've all been on the program at some point. And they don't talk about really networking so much. They don't talk about selling. They talk about forming genuine relationships. All things being equal, we do business with people we know, like, and trust. And that's what they teach, how to effectively build those connections. So that means whether you're in commission sales, salaried sales, nonprofit, dating, I suppose, this is something that would be useful to you. And so you can find out more by going to donking.com/saleswise. For those of you who are on here visually, we'll actually have that running in the crawl from time to time so that you can easily get that. Also, want to tell you about Val Roskin's Tees. I think I'm saying her name right. The last name is spelled Tews, but pronounced like Tees. Val is a content strategy writer who helps authors and coaches get past the stress and overwhelm of figuring out what to post on LinkedIn, one of the best networks for connecting with people professionally. She offers what she calls stress-free content creation. Think of it as transformational content support that helps you build a community of readers, potential clients, and even business friends. Now, if you think, okay, authors, they know how to write, correct? Well, yeah, but not this kind of writing. I hear this from authors all the time that their most confused aspect of their business, and we authors are in business, is how do I write that sort of copy? And so this is where Val comes in. Now, you can find out more about Val and her work at DonnKing.com. DonnKing.com. That's Don with a double N, DONNKING.com/butterfly. Now, why butterfly? Well, the name of her business is Butterfly Copywriting. So DonnKing.com/butterfly. I have to also mention a third sponsor, some guy named Donn King who has books that he's written. And you can find out more about that at donking.com/books. But for now, I want to go ahead and tell you about our guest. Uh, Her name is Penny Hopkinson. She lives in England, and I don't know if it's just mainly here in the American South, but we love the British accent. I'm told that folks over there tend to like the American Southern accent. Don't know, but there's a real connection there. And it just struck me in getting to know Penny that her career has taken her from the streets of Baghdad to boardrooms around the world. She's been a journalist, an international editor, a Middle East correspondent, and now she helps franchisors and business leaders create operations manuals that actually work. Now, if you think of an operations manual as something that they hand to you and then you stick it on the shelf and don't pay any attention to it, that's not what's going on here. Her book, Manual Magic, reimagines how we share knowledge across teams, especially in the modern era. She brings a lifetime of experience in communication, engagement, and making complex systems clear and human. It's very important in today's world. Here on the Alignment Show, after all, we are all about connection and aligning with your values. And so this, to me, was a very important conversation. Now, I said we had those tech issues last Friday. I think when I start trying to play back the interview, I'm probably going to have to reconnect it here. So, world, bear with me here for just a second, and we will get the interview with Penny Hopkinson going. I told you there'd be something special, though. Penny is actually live with us. She's in the green room right now. So we're going to play back the episode. And then at the end, we're going to come back to her for an update because we recorded this thing back in March. And Penny is always moving, and there's something new that she has to tell us about. So we'll bring her on at the end of this to catch up and see what has happened with her since. So let's see if I can get my recorded self to talk to us here. Yeah, I am going to have to reconnect it. Okay, so clicky, follow the prompts. Who happen to be on with us live, if you happen to go back and listen to the episode again, you will notice that I'm cutting this part out. It won't come out of the replays of the video, but it will come out of the audio version. So here we are with Penny Hopkinson. Donn, take it away. Really? So we're very happy to be talking with Penny today. And Penny, we didn't get your name fully on the screen. I just realized that it is Penny Hopkinson, right? Am I saying
That's
that
correct.
right? Very good. And for our listeners, I have had the joy of getting to know Penny over the last couple of months. She's part of a mastermind group that I am a member of. In fact, we've had Dan Janal on the program before, and we'll have him on again. So he's the one who introduced us. And right off the bat, Penny, just at the top of my head, it is truly a small world. I'm in East Tennessee. You are somewhere in England. I don't even know where. And we have another mutual friend, Sanit van Broida, who is in South Africa. And it stuns me sometimes how, with 7 billion people on Earth, how often I will come across somebody that also knows somebody I know. So I don't know if it's because we're all writers or podcasters or what.
I think it's a theory of 7 degrees of separation, isn't it?
Yeah. And you don't think about that going worldwide, but I think it really does. So it's just been great getting to know you. And I was so, I guess the word is impressed with what you're doing now and how you got there. So, let's just kind of dig into that a little bit. First of all, right now, where in England are you? Am I saying, I know United Kingdom, but I also know the United Kingdom includes several countries. So
I'm in England, and I'm near about 11 miles away from Stratford-on-Avon, where Shakespeare was born.
Ah, yes,
So it's
indeed.
easily identifiable to anyone who has had the pleasure of reading Shakespeare at school.
And when you are a writer, I mean, that means even more to be that close. I remember hearing Sir Ken Robinson talk about how odd it was to think about the idea that Shakespeare had an English teacher at some point. So,
Yes, yes, it is a kind of oddity. But even odder, I used to have a holiday cottage in Dorset. And I don't know whether you know of the writer Thomas Hardy.
yes. Yes.
Right. He wrote Far from the Madding Crowd, amongst many other wonderful books. And Far from the Madding Crowd was my O-level subject for literature, English literature. And fast forward all these years, I found a cottage in Thomas Hardy country, and the manor to our farm workers' cottages was the model Hardy used for Wetherby Farm.
Oh, wow.
I know it was just amazing, and I was such a fan. This was a book I think I read in a nanosecond. Have read and reread it, seen the original film with Julie Christie and Terence Stamp, and then they did a remake of it, which is actually just as wonderful.
Oh, I have not seen those films, but I'm gonna have to look for those. So, just we were talking a little while ago about the small world in terms of personal connections, but in terms of influences, there's also all of that. We often say on this show that this is not a show primarily for writers or about writers, but the nature of the alignment show, the idea of bringing your life into alignment with your values, means that we bring writers on a lot, because I think writers, maybe more than most people, will think about, why am I doing what I'm doing? There are easier ways to make a living, and so it's important to us to be working with language, with words, with communication, with making an impact. So it's useful, I hope, for anybody, because most of us need to be digging into what drives us, what matters to us. So let's use that as a jumping off place, to kind of go back to your origin story. Um, a lot of our listeners, of course, are in the U.S., so they're not going to relate to the education levels you were talking about. And I don't know for sure what level you were talking about, with the schooling thing you were just mentioning. So would that be more like our high school or more like our college where you were doing that writing initially?
It would be, I think it would be for school and English literature, it's definitely high school. It
High
was not,
school. Okay.
yeah.
Okay. So it sounds like you have been interested, fascinated with the written language from a young age.
Yes, absolutely. And I think it goes back to my father, who used to read to me before I went to sleep. And I loved the stories. And one of my favorites, A. A. Milne with Winnie the Pooh, and the simplicity of how all the stories were put across. I just absolutely loved them. And at school, my best subject was English language, thankfully. And I loved writing essays.
Mm.
And the one way I knew that I could get noticed was the beginning of a story to grab attention,
Mm.
which I did with monotonous regularity.
Hmm.
The next thing was that when I left school at 16 to go to college. And my tutor wrote by the side of an article I wrote on hot wire cutting, just for something different to grab attention. Have you ever thought of being a technical writer? And of course, at that point, at 16, I hadn't. But that set something off, and then that's all I wanted to do. And the reason I wrote the article was because my father was an engineer. And I think he felt that I was a sort of, I could be both son and daughter. He could show me how things worked, involve me in his world, because my mother wasn't interested at all. And so he would take me into his factory and say, this is what it does, this is how it does it. Now you try it. And that satisfaction of knowing that I'd carried something out after his show, don't tell, has always been with me.
Now, that makes sense. Now, I have a little sideways question here, not to spend a lot of time on it, but I'm always fascinated when somebody says, you know, my father was an engineer, my mother wasn't interested in that kind of thing. How did the two of them get together? Is this an opposite attracts thing, do you think?
Well, apparently, my mother was exceptionally attractive. And they met when she was working for my grandfather as his secretary, and my father came back from India during a break in the war. And their eyes met across a crowded room. He threw her a cigarette, and 2 weeks later, he was going down to Devonport, which is where the Naval College was, or the big naval base, and saying, when can you get a divorce? So I think it was love at first sight, but all the other things had to follow on. And my mother was the most amazing cook. She was absolutely fabulous. So my father was always well fed, as was I. That probably accounts for a lot. She was the one who ran the house. My father ran the garden and made sure that I went to, well, I say he made sure I went to a decent school, but I went to a private school, which was a boarding school. And it was not the most wonderful experience I've ever had.
Yeah.
But they had a lifestyle. And I think my mother felt that perhaps boarding school would absolve her from a lot of the day-to-day things that children need.
Yeah. So as you say, it wasn't the most fun thing looking back on it, but it just strikes me that that combination was an ideal cauldron almost for what you did later in life. So if at 16 you began thinking about technical writing, which I think for a lot of our listeners, they may not be quite sure what technical writing means, but if they know anything about it, they probably don't think of it as being the kind of exciting writing that journalism might be, or stagecraft, or novel writing, or any of that kind of thing. But you sound really enthusiastic about it, if that makes sense. So can you walk us through, because we're talking about several years of career here, but can you walk us through how you got started and then how one thing led to another?
Absolutely. Well, I left college at 18 with my shorthand and typing skills, with no intention whatsoever of being a shorthand typist. It was what my parents said: if you do this, you will always have a job. And actually, they were 100% correct, because within 3 weeks of leaving college, I had a job at Boozy and Hawkes Music Publishers. Well, it was publishing, wasn't it? So I was shorthand typist to the secretary at the Education Music Director. And that meant that I did all the sort of letters and shorthand typing things, and the secretary did all the arranging and so on. She and I became wonderful friends, and until her death
and I hate to interrupt, but I know for a lot of our listeners, they're not going to know what shorthand is or shorthand
Ah,
type is. I don't want to divert you from the story much, but just give that little definition.
right.
What are we talking about?
Right. Shorthand is the most amazing way of writing long things, long tracks of information in short form. Every word or couple of letters has a symbol which makes up your paragraphs. So if you write, Dear Mrs. So and so, dear has one symbol, which is like a little shepherd's crook the wrong way.
So
And
it's almost like recording without using a machine.
yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yes. I mean, we didn't have recording machines in those days. We might have had a reel to reel,
Hmm.
but it was used for commercial purposes. It was never used for writing letters. It was probably something the BBC would use when they
Hmm.
were going out interviewing somebody. But for me, it was enabling me to write as somebody spoke.
There we go. Because the average American, I don't know what it is over there, but the average American speaks at 150 words per minute. And even if you are a good typist, doing more than 90 words a minute is a challenge.
Yes.
Okay. So just
So
for that context there, and sorry to interrupt, but I do want to
not,
hear.
not at all, because I understand that I now need to relate to something that is extinct, more or less extinct. so, so putting it this way, I could do shorthand at about 120 words a minute with 90% accuracy.
Okay.
And then typing, which was on the old manual typewriter, long before word processors had come into being, my accuracy was 150 words a minute.
Wow. Amazing. Yeah. And,
Um,
and on a manual typewriter too. So okay. So this woman then that you were working with, you said became your best friend, I
oh,
think?
she became a wonderful friend. She emigrated to Washington, and she ended up by marrying the editor of the Washington Post.
Oh wow.
Yes.
Okay.
So we had lots and lots in common. We kept in touch for, it must be 50 years, until
Mm,
sadly she died about 4 years ago.
sorry to
Um,
hear.
I'm still in touch with her daughter,
Oh
so
good.
so the continuity is there. However, the director of the education music department called me in 3 months after I'd arrived and said, Miss Hopkinson, because that's how you were always addressed in those days, I don't think you're really suited to this type of job. I think perhaps your talents lie elsewhere. And he was absolutely right.
Mm,
So I then did a lot of other little secretarial things, which didn't amount to much. And I found an advertisement for an editorial assistant on hospital building and engineering and health service hygiene and equipment. And I applied, and Dr. Roy Owen took a chance. And within 3 months, I was an assistant editor. And then 2 years later, I moved to printing equipment and materials. I did all sorts of other jobs with occupational safety and health, social services reporting. There's a very famous actress called Hayley Mills,
yes. Yes,
Sir
ma'am.
John Mills' daughter.
Mm,
I got my first world exclusive when she had her baby, and I went to interview her.
Oh, cool, cool. How
And
how did you manage to get to interview her? I mean,
it was arranged through Nursery World,
okay.
where I was freelancing.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so I went along there armed with a teddy bear, again to break the ice. And
Hmm.
she said, "Oh, this is the first time anybody has given us a little gift like that." Probably wasn't, but
No.
she was so gracious, really gracious, and we had a wonderful interview. And I still have that tape. I still have her letter of thanks.
Cool. That is just so cool. There's a lesson there, I think, for all of our listeners about finding a way to connect with somebody that you want to talk with. Whether listener, whether you are a writer or an interviewer or whatever, we're always making connections, and so this is a great lesson in breaking the ice.
And I've used an icebreaker in almost every interview I've ever made.
Hmm. So,
Um,
in order to do an icebreaker, you research the person a little bit, or because you're not just getting a generic gift and giving to the same thing to everybody.
no, 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 no. Um, we'll I'm sure we'll come to it later. But when I interviewed ministers, merchants, and members of the ruling families in the Gulf states, one of the things that we did with a magazine that I worked for called Alamata Jarrett, which is like Business Week, only monthly, I would take a black and white passport photograph, give it to the talented artists on the magazine, and they would produce a colour portrait. And we would give the colour portrait the next time we saw. I went out into the Gulf, and I would present the portrait to them.
Hmm. And I'll bet that was not a usual experience for them.
At all, not at all. It won me a lot of friends, a lot of really wonderful interviews,
Hmm.
and more than anything else, um, it was an education. It was just fantastic.
Hmm. Hmm. And we're going to, as you say, we're going to circle back around to talk about the particular people in a little more in depth. But for my question right now, let's set a context. We're talking about some people that were well known worldwide. Did you get a sense that when you gave them the portrait or whatever other thing that allowed that connection, that yes, these people were in positions of power, but on some level, they were just like everybody else, delighting in little things, needing the human connection?
Yeah,
Does the question make sense there?
yeah, just human, human like us all. You know,
Uh,
it's if you find that connection, it's absolutely wonderful. I mean, there are some situations, and I'm sure you've been in them, where you can't make any connection at all.
yeah. Yeah.
It doesn't matter what you do. There is just nothing in
Mhm.
common. You're there to do a job. You do the job. You don't have any feeling afterwards. But so many of the jobs that I've had have ended with marvelous friendships.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and let's, because I'm watching the time, I want to be respectful of your time. Let's circle around to you had that first interview with Haley Mills, and we might say it wasn't the first interview you'd ever done, but it was perhaps the first one with a notable or well known interviewee. That led to other things along the same lines, I think, correct?
Yes, it did. It led to my eventual becoming, I think I was 28 when I became editor of a new publication called Media International. It was the European Journal for Planners of International Advertising. And that meant I was with every type of publication, all the big corporations, all the big advertising agencies, and it put me into a completely different context. And I'm sure you know from being a writer, advertising and editorial don't mix, or they
Yeah.
didn't. They do now. In those days, what was I doing writing about advertising? I really couldn't get my head around it. Um, but that was a marvelous 3 years of launching the publication, where it was the only one of its type. Advertising Age did similar things, but was not the same because it was USA focused. We had Campaign in the UK, which again was similar, but focused on the UK. And Media International was truly an international, it became a sensation overnight for the publishers.
Okay.
I had to learn a lot of very strange foreign titles from Norway to North America.
Yeah, yeah, I can imagine. I mean, it's hard
Um,
enough writing about that kind of thing as it is. Um,
but my
was it? Did you have multiple language publications, or was it all in English as sort of the international business language?
no, there were multiple languages. There was everything from, let's say, Dagens Nyheter in Switzerland, in Sweden, through to Le Figaro France. Then you had packaging publications, you name it, we covered it. And my average week could be going out with the international director of Time magazine, meeting Malcolm Forbes. He was over, he actually had a house on the other side of the Thames, but he came over for a launch. And then his son, Stephen, who's now taken over the reins, he was, I think, still a student when he arrived in Covent Garden in the centre of London on an elephant. I
Say
mean,
that again. An elephant?
yes, he came into Covent Garden riding an elephant.
Oh my!
And we were entertained royally at Malcolm Forbes' house, which was sold about, I think it must be about 6 years ago, which I read in the press. But I would be going to press conferences because mine was the only publication of its type. I was always the focus. So I had the most wonderful, my business life merged into my personal life because I was going to press dues of some description 4 times a week.
Mhm.
So the publication had to be put together outside hours very often. But it was wonderful. I learned such a lot. It was where my international experience opened up, and where I could truly say that my outlook was definitely European, and I reveled in all the places and the people I met.
So you were age 28, roughly age 30. Were you so busy that it didn't occur to you at the time the levels that you were running around in, or at the time were you going, wow, I can't believe I'm here, just and if it was that latter, a lot of people would be dealing with imposter syndrome at that point or whatever. How did you navigate being in those circles? Does that make sense?
Yes, I think I was really lucky because the one thing that private school gives you is the ability to communicate with anyone at any level.
Mm.
I won't say that I didn't get nervous. I definitely did. I mean, there was horrendous time when it was, I can't remember which advertising agency it was. It was one of the biggest in the world at the time. And the CEO had come over. I was detailed to sit next to him. He had his right hand man there. It was a huge, huge dinner at one of the top hotels. And I didn't have any problems with being there, but in the lift, in a break during the dinner, the right hand man was in the lift and he kept on saying to something, he whispered something in my ear which I couldn't quite get. And all I could hear is nose. And I thought, oh no, I better blow my nose. Oh help. That terrible feeling that, like spinach between your teeth.
Yes. Yes.
And what he'd actually said, you're sitting next to the most powerful advertising man in the world. Your nose is shiny.
Oh, wow.
And it was all I could do not to stop, to stop myself from laughing, because he was treating me as a model who would be perhaps considered for one of the advertisements.
Interesting. Okay.
And I never had any time for that. That was not me at all.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
In fact, I was going to be selected to do an ad for Yamaha in full leather gear on a motorbike, and I turned it down. I didn't. It's just not me.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean that's a great lesson in and of itself. A lot of people would look at something like that and say, "Well, it's an opportunity. I ought to take it." But if it doesn't fit your values, here we are with our show theme.
And
You
yeah,
know, I could. You probably know we're not going to name names here, but you probably know people who were presented with an opportunity. Said, "It's a great opportunity, making a lot of money. They're getting a lot of notice or whatever." But it doesn't fit their values. And so even though the world might look at them as being a great success, they're kind of miserable.
yeah. I just I wanted my work to be fun, fulfilling, do a tremendous, as good a job as I could possibly do. I wasn't interested in making a name for myself, because I think, in the early years, I had bylines in various publications. And to be honest, interviewing Hayley Mills was probably the biggest name and byline I could have had as a world exclusive.
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't what I was about. I was about communicating information that could change people's opinion for the better, so that they could have a balanced opinion,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
or to explain something that a lot of people didn't know.
Yeah, and that's where your satisfaction
Yeah,
came from. Yeah.
totally. And it's
Little
always,
little side trip here. A lot of times, people outside of media will say, "Oh, byline. That's about tooting your own horn or whatever." Bylines go on stories basically for purposes of responsibility. Would you agree with that?
yes, I would.
Yeah.
Because if you've written the article, you are responsible for what you've written.
Yeah, yeah. So it's not so much about getting your name out there, although, a given byline may become recognizable over time. That's not the reason that they put bylines on stories. For the most part, as reporters, as interviewers, we fade into the background. Now, we've been kind of circling around this, but I think a name that most of our listeners would recognize, and correct me if I'm mispronouncing his name. Another side trip, we had a president here who was famous for mispronouncing his name, and I'm convinced he mispronounced it on purpose because he was the former head of the CIA. I know President Bush knew how to pronounce that name, and the name, of course, is Saddam Hussein. Am I saying it the way he would say it?
Yes, we would say Saddam Hussein,
There we go.
but he would always put the emphasis on the arm, Saddam
Yeah,
Hussein.
yeah. I think he and I can kind of do a George Bush. So we're going to have to go over there and deal with that there Saddam Hussein, and I think he's putting. I think it was intended as an insult, but that's a whole other discussion.
Mind you, I wouldn't disagree with because obviously the world knows what he was capable of
Yes.
and what he did. Um, Yet they did not understand that you need a strong man to deal with up to 50 different tribes.
Mm,
Otherwise, the country falls apart, which it did.
yeah, yeah. So how did you wind up in the same room with Saddam Hussein? Uh, and this is almost tongue in cheek. How did you wind up in the same room with him and survive? Did that happen more than once?
No, in fact, I wasn't actually in the same room.
There we go. Okay.
I was in the same room as Tariq Aziz, and I was in the same room. Tariq Aziz was the trade minister, the most trusted minister in Saddam's arsenal, if you like, and also Naim Haddad, who was the Speaker of the National Assembly. I also interviewed a lot of what was generally known as the pack of cards and all the characters who had the royal cards,
Mm,
um, and and they were quite fearsome. They were definitely not the same as the other Gulf Arab ministers that I used to interview. Um, Tariq Aziz was the only Christian in the entire cabinet,
mm,
or as we would know, his office. And I was there because I I can't even remember how it happened, but I was living in Germany, somebody had informed the Deutsche Arabische Gesellschaft, which is the German Arab Friendship Society, that I had knowledge of all the Gulf states and had been there for getting on for the best part of, I don't know, 5 or 6 years,
mm.
interviewing across the Gulf states, and I think you call it also the Persian Gulf, um, more commonly. Um, and they were going on a mission with the Bundestag and European Parliament parliamentarians before the trade agreement was going to be signed. So what they do is they send out a cultural mission. The cultural mission lays the groundwork for the signing of the trade agreement between Bonn and Baghdad. And they asked me to become an advisor.
Mm.
Not one to turn anything like that down. I was the only journalist, I was the only female, and there were about 20 European parliamentarians and Bundestag members. And we went everywhere in a motorcade. We were treated absolutely royally. We saw things that the average visitor would never see, including the Hanging Gardens of Babylon,
Wow.
where you could see the walls were so thick that two chariots could drive side by side on the battlements,
Wow. Wow.
which was actually awe-inspiring. And that was before Saddam Hussein decided that he was going to put his handprint or something in every brick to rebuild it. So I'm glad that I saw it before he had done that.
Yeah.
Um, but we went to a restaurant which was in what was a 14th century staging post. And that's where the shepherds used to bring their flocks into central Baghdad in the olden days. And they used to sleep round the edges of the almost like an arena, and all the flocks were in the centre. And the centre was made into a restaurant which served food of the time with the waiters in the manner of the time, and they played old Iraqi music, the 14th century. And
Wow.
that was one of the most memorable things, I think, memorable experiences in all my time out there.
Okay. Okay. So, I'm looking at the time, and again, I want to be respectful of your time, but I don't want to make too much of a leap here. So, at that point, you were what, mid 30s, maybe?
It went up to 40 because I
Okay.
was there a decade.
Okay. Okay. Uh, what came next after that? And I'm going to plant a question that will come up again as we talk about that. What you're doing now, I think, in a way, is very different from what you were doing then. And yet, I'll bet that those experiences of interviewing business leaders, political leaders at that level affects what you do now. And I'm curious as to how that works these days, if that makes sense. So we'll plant that question for future.
Right.
So what came next?
Right. What came next was because everything became political. So, as I'm a socioeconomics correspondent in the Gulf states or the whole of the Middle East, I decided that the publications like the Wall Street Journal, International Herald Tribune that I was working for, they wanted political input. They were getting very little advertising around the special supplements that we always used to do for the national days around the 10-year or 5-year development programs. So I found my income dropped like a stone. And I had the opportunity to become quality correspondent for the Institute of Purchasing Supply publications, their management manual, and a fortnightly quality newsletter. And I became totally entranced by total quality management, quality circles, Kaizen, the Japanese version of quality management, and the introduction of the white paper on quality, which was brought out in about 1986 and followed through to BS 5750, which became ISO 9001, which is universally understood in business. And I thought perhaps I could form a business with quality at the centre, write operations manuals, and I did my proof of concept with the Corporation of Lloyd's of London with a 2-year contract, which was not my intention. I just wanted to know what my market value was, and got offered a different job from the, excuse me, the advertisement that I'd answered. And so the next opportunity was a franchise. And I had no idea what a franchise was. I don't think I even knew that, excuse me, McDonald's was a franchise. So I had an induction from one of the biggest consultants in the UK, and they taught me all about franchising and retailing, and that was the foundation for becoming a member of the British Franchise Association and working with some of the iconic brands.
Mm-hmm. Now, the first thing that occurs to me in hearing this transition, I think a lot of folks on the outside looking in would think, okay, you went from this international hobnobbing, hopping around, to almost a standard business environment. but I'm also betting that it was simply a different kind of excitement, maybe because of the challenge. You were in something you weren't already familiar with. Would you say that it was just a change of excitement? Is that an accurate way to put it?
Yes. I mean, I was a career journalist, or at
Mhm,
least that's what I thought. And the idea that I wouldn't be a journalist again was not very comfortable.
mhm,
But I was still interviewing people because I had to know everything about their business system. So I had to create a blueprint of their business system and then make that come to life in text and make sure that the system was faithfully replicated in every single franchise of a large network. And it that was the excitement, to
mm.
be able to get that blueprint and learn how businesses are successful.
So it sounds like to me that although somebody might look on the surface and say these were very different careers, you were still following your underlying values, the things that were important to you. Being a cover model was not important, but this working with words and clarifying concepts, understanding it and making it clear to somebody else. I also have to wonder, and again, this is stereotype, I know, but I think a lot of my friends are engineers, and they would kind of say the same thing. In fact, one of them told me once, "Do you know how you can tell an extroverted engineer? He stares at your shoes while he talks." And and he told me this in order to illustrate the idea that for most engineers, the way of thinking that makes them effective as engineers is very different from the way of thinking that makes them effective communicators. And so you're kind of providing that bridge. Did you find that because of the area that you were working in, that you really were in a unique position, or was this a common thing?
No, I was in a unique position. I was very lucky. I found a niche, very, very narrow niche, and I, um, because of that, I worked with the British Franchise Association on their franchisee guides. I helped them with the European Code of Conduct, their handbook, and many other things besides. And in 2011, they made me a companion of the British Franchise Association for services to UK franchising and to the BFA, of which I'm immensely, immensely grateful,
Mm,
because that opened up so many more opportunities. And it's just wonderful to be recognized for what you specialized in.
yeah, yeah. I would go so far as to say we were talking about bylines a little while ago, and it's on there for taking responsibility and not for getting names out there. And you've not been concerned about being famous or well known. But as I'm getting to know Penny Hopkinson a little bit more, I'm betting that you have had influence and impact on the way business functions in the UK, in Europe, broader than that, in ways that people would be surprised. I mean, they don't know the name Penny Hopkinson, and yet you, in a way, have shaped a portion of the industry. Now, I know you're not the kind of person to toot your own horn, but if you can objectively step back, do you think that's an accurate statement?
I'd like to think that I did make a difference somewhere. And actually, today, I read on LinkedIn that somebody had been appointed, somebody that I'm had been having lots of discussions with, has been made a global franchise um, director of operations.
Mhm.
And I congratulated him, and he was kind enough to say that in no small part I'd helped.
That's got to feel good. It means that you were living your values and it made a difference to you and to your world.
Yes. And he and somebody else in the business each had a copy. They bought their own copy of Manual Magic, which I wrote in 2023, which is all about creating the operations manual your franchisees need to succeed and scale the business.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't believe that both of them had read it from start to finish, and that it had made a little bit of an impact on
Mm-hmm.
what they were doing. But today, I mean, it was just marvelous when I looked at LinkedIn and I saw the comment after I'd made a comment on their post. So if that's the only thing that I'd achieved in 35 years in franchising, that's the one thing I really, really love.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I'm betting our listeners are probably curious at this point. If you're on with us on video, as usual, we've had some links going by on the crawl. For our audio only folks, we want to be sure and put those out there. And a little reminder, you can always follow the links, which we'll have several of, in our show notes, which you can find at confidencecultivators.com. But Penny, it makes effective use of Linktree to link to several things like that. So that is Linktree, and it's spelled linktr.ee/Penny Hopkinson. I think you can probably tell what I'm saying here, but again, I'll have a link to that in our show notes. And let me see that. I had a question in mind, and then it kind of skittered away. We've mentioned manual magic a couple of times, and that it's just been out for a couple of years, and yet it seems to really be making an impact. Um, the comment that we said for somebody from the outside, they might think, "Oh, technical manual, that's just kind of boring," and you are writing stuff that's neither boring nor exciting the way a novel is. You are writing something that is effective and engaging, I think, is the way to put it. How would you describe the difference in what you're doing and maybe the standard technical manual?
Well, the standard technical manual absolutely has to explain from A to Z exactly what the steps necessary to complete that process are. Mine are all management manuals, which is a little bit more flexible. But today, I no longer create dull, text heavy operations manuals because the world's changing. Obviously, we are now digital mostly, and we've got up to 5 generations under one workplace, and they've all got different learning styles, learning abilities, and we need to look at how we're training, and a dull text heavy manual does not do it. It doesn't give you a single source of truth either, because if you've got a large network, you're going to have many different trainers, and they will all have their own styles. Some will be really, really good. You know, it'll probably be the 80-20 Pareto's rule, and 20% will be brilliant, 80% will be mediocre. So how do you get that single source of truth? Luckily, technology is on our side, and as I've seen manuals go from the paper-based doorstop, gathering dust, and then we put the first Costa Coffee manuals on CD-ROM, which was highly innovative. It's very strange to think about that now. Then we went online. We put it on portals, or we put it in the cloud. But again, not really terribly interesting. But today, we've got digital natives who are in the workplace, and they are the YouTube, TikTok, Instagram generations, and they want bite-sized chunks of information. They will not read a text-heavy manual, and you won't get the replication that is important in franchising. To faithfully replicate the business system is to succeed. So how do we do it? We now take a smartphone, arm the teams, not just the corporate franchisor. We arm the teams with a smartphone and say, why don't you record this process in little bite-sized snippets, upload it onto a knowledge sharing platform, which is dedicated and dynamic. And then we put captions on, turn it into a QR code, and the QR code is positioned at the point of need so that it can be captured with a smartphone. You can, let's say you're French, you're in England, you read English okay, but you prefer to go through an instruction in your native language. You can now choose that language for the captions, for the voiceover, for the audio, or you can use it visually. And that's at your own pace. You know that it's correct. Other team members can have input and say, we've got a better way of doing it. Let me show yours, and they can put that alongside the original. And then if the other one is better, adopt that one. So the philosophy of continuous improvement lives strongly, and that's how you scale a business.
Okay, and that makes a lot of sense. Let's ask a question that I'm sure is on some listeners' mind out there, which is to go along with what you've already said. It's no longer just about pure information. How AI has changed that, and the flip side of the coin is within that. How do you double down, as Joanna Penn would say, double down on being human in order to bring that value to it beyond the simple information? Does that make sense?
Yes, I mean, you're recording a process with humans. So let's say Mary has found a new way to soften butter that's needed for a Victoria sponge. And she's tested it out on the microwave, and she's got 30 steps to make this work perfectly. And the problem she solved is the kitchen hand, when he comes in first thing in the morning, always forgets to take it out of the butter out of the fridge. So it's hard. You've got very heavy Victoria sponges. The chefs aren't happy. The bakers aren't happy. And there are loads of customer complaints. So Mary tests it out. She goes to her manager, says, I've tested this. Can I do a little video with Carl, the kitchen hand? And so they do this together. No faces are shown. It's just hands doing the operation. And it's all uploaded. And the manager sanctions it, and it goes to head office for approval. Mary gets an Amazon voucher for £100 because she solved a problem. Then, for the franchisee conference at the end of the year, the best ideas are highlighted, and the top idea that's reduced wastage, incidents, accidents, created better engagement and customer satisfaction will get a training bursary of, let's say, $3,000. And the person who's put the best idea forward gets a trip to, let's say, New York or Paris. So the whole philosophy is one of engagement, because young people today Certainly they want to earn a decent living, but they want a company that shares their values. They want to feel valued. They want to make a difference to the company that they've joined, and they want longevity. They don't want to hop from place to place. They want a career. So if they feel valued, if they feel motivated and incentivized, and they have peer-to-peer engagement rather than top-down, much more likely to get a new generation who really push the business forward. And that's what we're all about.
Okay, that is a very clear and succinct way to look at how this fits in with the current situation. That is brilliant. That leads me to a question. I like to give credit where credit is due. This is a question that I learned from my friend Bob Berg, one of the co-authors of the Go Giver series, and that is, if I were to refer somebody to you, Penny, who would be the ideal client, somebody that you could help? How would I know that person? Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. And I know exactly where Bob comes from because he was a guest on our with our group, our mastermind group. My ideal client is a franchisor who has a network of 40 plus franchisees across the globe, and they want to share knowledge rather than create an operations manual. So my idea of reimagining the operations manual as a knowledge sharing environment where everyone can participate, learn and grow fires them with great enthusiasm. And they are willing to be coached and mentored to get that done.
Very good. Very good. So a good starting place for that, I would assume, would be your book, Manual Magic.
It absolutely.
Am I correct in that?
Yes, because it positions franchisors and to an extent licensors, because they share a very similar business format.
Okay.
So,
okay. And go
yes,
ahead.
so Manual Magic is how to create an operations manual. It goes into great detail. It's a heavy tome. It's about 51,000 words, which is a good 300 pages. And it's available on Amazon.com or .co.uk in Kindle and paperback format.
Very good. And so, folks, I've got it pulled up here. I'm going to show if I can. Let's see. Screen share. Yes, that's it. Want to see the cover here, and folks, we'll have a link to it in our show notes. Okay, I believe that is showing there. Manual Magic.
Absolutely, and it should have 30 something reviews, nearly 30 reviews between the two.
And there's Penny. Okay, so we'll have that link for you, folks. Yeah, you know, we've always got the affiliate link and all that sort of thing, but you can just go find it, you know. And so that's a good introduction to the way that Penny helps businesses, and it excites me to hear your excitement. How shall I ask this? I think you and I are kind of out of the same generation, Penny, and so it would be easy for both of us to just say, I'm just gonna sit in a rocking chair or whatever. That's not you, that's not me, you know. So what is next for Penny Hopkinson?
Well, I'm building a web app and mobile app which if I can possibly do this, and I've started it, so I'm going to try and finish it, so that a business can upload their intellectual property and AI will create the standard operating procedures for those who don't want to create a knowledge sharing environment because they're not ready. And this would help anybody to create their own SOPs.
Fascinating. Because again, right off the top of my head, a lot of the people that I know and work with, I would describe myself that way. We are solopreneurs, and yet we want to be able to pass on our business at some point, maybe expand it. This would be a great tool for that kind of an almost an inter step, prior to getting to that big.
I think it's like the evergreen product. You have your webinars, you have your mobile and web-based app, and that just continues in perpetuity while I pursue my hobbies.
Indeed. Well, folks, that's one of the advantages of something like a link tree, because Penny will be adding to that link tree. That's like a universal kind of location. So again, for those of you listening, link tree, that's linktr.ee, linktree/Penny Hopkinson. And we'll have that in our show notes at confidencecultivators.com. So I've kept you a long time here, Penny, because it's been a fascinating conversation. Quite honestly, this is the reason I do the podcast. I get to have conversations I wouldn't otherwise get to have. But I probably should, out of respect for you, draw this to a close. Let me ask, is there anything that I didn't ask about that you wish that I had? And if so, what would your answer to that?
I guess my answer would be, what do I do in my spare time?
There we go. Okay, you have spare time?
I think it's really the high days and holidays, because I absolutely love traveling and have done a great deal of it. I've been very fortunate throughout my life and been to some interesting and sometimes weird and wonderful places. And as a result, photography is one of the things that I absolutely love. So you can see me, my husband and I sort of start walking together, and then I will dart off and find some scene or person or object that I'm fascinated with, and he'll just continue walking. So half a mile up the road later. But I love it. I think I've got something like 6,000 images on my phone, and I suppose you'd say that serious photographers don't use their iPhones, but they are so sophisticated.
Yeah. And I'm. This is as we're getting to know each other. You don't know this about me. I was a professional photographer years ago, but it was in the day when Tri-X pan was the black and white standard. So that will tell you how long ago that's been. And I was just commenting to my wife about these days, because everybody has a fairly sophisticated camera on their phone. They don't think they need professional photographers like they used to, but there's still a difference in the eye, in what you see and what you do with that tool. So I think the iPhone camera is pretty dang good, and it's still about framing and choosing your subject and all, and depth of field and all that sort of thing. So is there a possibility that there will be a Penny Hopkinson photography book, not a book about how to, but independently published perhaps of your images? I would be fascinated.
Well, we were going to do this many years ago as a coffee table book of the Middle East, but somehow we never got round to it. To be truthful, I don't think I am good enough to do that. Although some,
Mm,
you could say out of all those, there could be, I don't know, maybe a dozen really good photos that somebody
mm,
who is experienced would say, my goodness, that's a good shot. And then I look
mhm.
at a friend of mine who's a wildlife photographer, and you think, gosh, he spends hours and hours waiting for that hare to appear, the kingfisher to dive with the fish in its mouth. Um, no, I don't think that there's going to be that kind of a book. There could be memoirs though, and they could be
Uh-huh.
illustrated.
Very good. I thought that I would buy that book immediately. So I will look forward to that. Well, Penny, again, this has gone longer than usual, but it's because it's been so fascinating and I think useful to our listeners. So thank you very much for spending the time with us here on the Alignment Show, and we will make sure that we have links in the show notes, et cetera, for folks who can get in touch with Penny. Perhaps you'll have more questions for her. So, Penny, once again, thank you for being here.
Don, thank you so much for inviting me. It's been fascinating. I've loved every minute.
And I'll turn it back over to my, I don't know, virtual self, alternate personality. Little side trip here, even if I'm wrapping up, Penny, you might know Frederick Bachman. You know the name. He was, and for folks who don't recognize it, he wrote the book A Man Called Of, which was the basis for the movie A Man Called Otto. And he told an audience at Simon and Schuster that being a writer is the best way to get paid for being insane. And so perhaps this is the split personality aspect as I go from one aspect of myself to the next. So, Donn? Split personality. Oh, goodness. Okay, so we're working out the technology there. Very happy to have had Penny on, and she's in the green room. I'm going to bring her on in just a moment for us to catch up on what's going on with that. I'll have a few observations even after that. I meant to mention at the beginning, we have finally gotten the URL for the show. Your show notes can now be found at thealignmentshow.com. And so confidence cultivators will continue to work, but we're gradually moving away from that. So you'll see changes in our background and all that sort of thing. But in any case, let's see if I can bring Penny on. We were winding up there pretty close to the end, talking about what was next. And I know that she has continued with that, maybe right at the point of launch, maybe a little past it. So, Penny, I'm bringing you on here. Thank you for being with us once again. And yeah, let's hear what has happened with that thing that you were thinking about doing, I believe, at the time.
Well, I was thinking of doing a manual magic AI, and that was going to allow scattered know-how or intellectual property to be shared as SOPs through an app. Well, it's now moved a lot further, and now we have the software as a service, a SaaS product, which will launch the waitlist very shortly on LinkedIn. So if anybody would like to link with me on LinkedIn, DM me directly. I can then tell them when the waitlist is launched, and instead of going and buying a copy of Manual Magic, we are, for all those who register interest, we're going to send them a digital copy free of charge.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, we've got, for folks that are on with us visually, we've got the reminder of Penny's Linktree link. For those who are listening audio, Linktree, linktr.ee/Penny Hopkinson. And Penny is spelled Penny. because there's more than one way to spell that. Um, so want to be sure people can get in touch with you, and we will get in the show notes Penny's LinkedIn. It's a little hard to say that out loud, but I think it's been a while since I just searched for Penny Hopkinson. Are there many of the Penny Hopkinsons out there in the world? Are they going to just find you by searching on Penny Hopkinson on LinkedIn?
There used to be one in Australia that I found, but as far as I know, on LinkedIn, I am the only one.
Okay, so that would be very easy for folks on audio only, especially. Just look for Penny Hopkinson and connect there. That's a great offer that you just made. Thank
Well,
you.
I think if anyone is interested in exploring Manual Magic AI further, just leaving an email address, it would be absolutely wonderful to be able to connect. And the least I can do is to reciprocate with an electronic version, a digital version.
Absolutely. Now, just for clarity, podcasts live forever out there on the internet. So somebody may find this years from now. Let's be clear about what is the date cutoff for that offer. Does that make
Yes,
sense?
it does. At the moment, it will be running for somewhere around 3 months. So if it's launched this month, which is June 2025, I think it's likely to be at the end of the month. So we're looking towards perhaps October to close the wait
Okay.
list.
Okay. So, folks, if you're finding this recording past October 2025, offer may be closed at this point, but it will still be an asset to dig into. So keep those connections available to you.
And
Well, Penny, go
I
ahead.
just need to say that it's way more sophisticated than described in our earlier conversation. It's moved on a lot, Don. So all the things that I thought I could do, but possibly weren't technically capable of doing, are now absolutely doable, and it's going to allow everyone to be what I call a done with you, but done by you, with AI as a human touch.
Excellent, excellent. And it's amazing if you stop and think about it. We recorded that interview in March. In some ways, that feels like a long time ago, but March, April, May, that's just 3 months. And tremendous development in that time. So that's impressive in and of itself. Wow, wow. Well, thank you once again for fascinating conversation. I commented in the recording that it had gone along. The day's episode had gone along. In episodes past, when we had longer ones, I broke it up. I couldn't find a good place to break this one, and I think it was well worthwhile for us to just stick with the entire conversation. So fascinating. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Don. It's been an absolute delight.
And thanks for coming back on for the update. Now, if you want to hang out in the green room for just a moment, I will thank you properly in just a second. But in the meantime, I'll close things out for this week. All righty. So, again, it was just such a pleasure to have Penny on here. Now, we've got some closing stuff to mention to you, a little reminder that we will have those show notes. I'm going to link to Haley Mills' biography, for example. I showed briefly on the screen an example of shorthand. A lot of you have never seen that. So we'll have follow-up stuff. Be sure and keep thealignmentshow.com in order to find the show notes. You can always go to DonnKing.com and the episode number to find it. Now, you don't know what it is right now, maybe, but DonnKing.com/91. Right now, that's just pointing to the promo, but that will resolve to the show notes before too long. You can support the show if you would like by buying me a coffee, as they say. It's the website buymeacoffee.com/Donn King. We encourage you to subscribe to make sure you find out about upcoming guests, that you stay connected as far as the community, because there is a community forming around us. We encourage you to upgrade for additional benefits, things like insights and that sort of thing. In any case, share this with a friend. You know somebody who would be encouraged by Penny's story, by the stories of all of our guests. And along with that, I'll mention that I work with a limited number of people to help them bring their books into publication. So if you would like to reach out to me, at Donn@DonnKing.com, I would be happy to talk with you about that. In any case, I'm not sure who's going to be with us next week on the Alignment Show, or even if it will be next week. Sometimes we go a couple of weeks, but there are exciting things going on around the Alignment Show, and I'm happy to share those things with you. So keep an eye out for it. If you subscribe at thealignmentshow.com, you will know about upcoming episodes. And in any case, we're happy to be here to help you to live your values so you can value your life. We'll see you next time here on The Alignment Show. That's a wrap for this episode of The Alignment Show. What's your next step? Whatever came up for you, take action. Talk it out with a friend or just sit with it for a moment. And if this episode sparked something meaningful, share it with someone you care about. You can subscribe and find all past episodes at thealignmentshow.com. And be sure to follow or leave a review wherever you heard or watched this. It really helps more folks find the show. We'll be back soon with another thoughtful conversation. Until then, live your values and value your life.